Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the greatest games on the Blizzard. My name is Marcus Speller. With me is Jonathan Wilson. And with us today is Richard Jolly, football journalist for The National, The Guardian, The Independent, The Telegraph, and many, many more. Richard, welcome to the pod.
Good to be here.
Now, today, ladies and gentlemen, we go back to the 23rd of October, 2011, Old Trafford. Manchester United 1, Manchester City 6. Richard, why have you chosen this game?
I think it's one of the most significant games that we've had in this country, probably in the last 20 odd years, for a number of reasons. And I guess the most obvious one is quite simply is that it was the heaviest defeat Alex Ferguson ever suffered. But it was also one of the most significant in terms of it shifted the balance of power. That game, it really did more than anything else, even though Manchester United won the title the following year in Sir Alex Ferguson's final season. I think that was the start of a run of City wins at Old Trafford. I think it was the really, you could see that City were on the up and United were on the slide. It came 5 months after a Champions League final, and United hadn't actually lost since they lost to Barcelona in that game. So at that point, you could say they were one of the two best teams in Europe. And then they're losing 6-1 at home to Manchester City, which was just a scoreline that absolutely nobody could believe.
Yeah, I mean, it had been sort of bubbling up with Manchester City gaining ground on Manchester United as they sort of spent a bit more money, brought in some more different faces, managers as well, Jonathan. Man City was slowly but surely getting there. But I think for a lot of neutrals, myself included, you always thought, yeah, but they won't quite get there, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, it's one of the joys of doing these podcasts is you look back at things you think you remember and realize that you don't remember them at all.
Yeah.
So we did a podcast with Jack Brooke talking about the FA Cup semi-final the previous year when City had beaten United, and he made the point that was the moment at which City take over from United. And I guess in retrospect he's right. That is the first real sign, but it's the FA Cup. There's all kinds of excuses happening in the FA Cup. It's a one-off game. Yeah, who knows how much teams really care? As Richard's just alluded to, Manchester United had the Champions League final coming up. So if they weren't fully focused on the FA Cup semi-final, that's entirely natural and normal. We've seen teams put in good performances in the cup who then don't kick on. For a result like this in the league, and not just to win, but to win in such emphatic style, yeah, it really was a sign of things have changed. And of course, the margin of victory, although we didn't know it at the time, turned out to be crucial in the title race that year.
And actually, Sir Alex Ferguson even mentioned goal difference in the press conference after the game without necessarily knowing quite how significant it would be. But I think much later on, he rued the 3 late goals when United were really chasing the game. And when it only been 3-1 until about the 88th minute, but it was those 3 late goals. And just to come back to what you were saying earlier, Paul Scholes was sent off in the FA Cup semi-final, so you could say, would it have been different had it been 11 against 11?
Johnny Evans, very similar players.
Well, yes, but also you had the Community Shield between the two teams.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
City go 2-0 up, United come back and win 3-2, and that's going back to what Marcus said, that's how it always felt, that United would just stay that bit ahead of them and that they'd always conjure up that late goal. And as long as Ferguson was there, you always had that feeling of invincibility about Ferguson's United, even as you watched them and thought, they're not actually as good as the 2008 team, and they've not really replaced Ronaldo, and some of their players are getting older, but it was still Ferguson's Manchester United. And I think that because of that, Roberto Mancini winning the title against Ferguson's United is actually a greater achievement than the subsequent Premier League titles City won, even though the later team scored more goals and Guardiola's team got 100 points.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about the Community Shield and that magic. So it absolutely was tapping into what I was saying. And that was also seen in the previous Premier League campaign, 2010-11, where there was a 0-0 at the Etihad. And that was sort of seen as a little bit of progression there for Manchester City. Then they go to Old Trafford, it's 1-1, and Rooney brings out that overhead kick. Okay, it might have been a bit of a shinner, but my goodness, if you can control the ball with the shin like that, then you're worthy of it. But there was always that bit of quality. But Manchester City, Jonathan, had been gathering players. You know, that Sergio Aguero was up front for them. You know, we were beginning to see what he could do. I mean, I suppose he hit the ground running, really, but one or two of the players, and a certain Mario Balotelli as well, who had the mercurial Balotelli, who had a lot of talent. He had a lot of problems or accusations, shall we say, off the field of various things. I mean, the day before this game, there was the firework incident, but Man City had a group of players who could produce moments of magic.
They could, but I think we've seen this before, maybe more in Italy than we have in England, of teams who spend a lot of money getting a lot of great players, and have they actually thought about the team structure? And I think of all his many strengths, one of Ferguson's greatest was that, yes, he spent money, but it wasn't vast fortunes. And by and large, when he bought players, it was to fit a plan. So some of those plans didn't work. So Varane, I guess, is the most obvious example of that. If he brought in a player at significant expense, and it didn't quite come off. But you could see what he was trying to do to shift from a 4-4-2 to pack the midfield. And so that, I think, is the difference. And so what I was saying before, you sort of forget things, and when you look back at games in the way we're doing now, you start to put things in context more. So it's 2 months before this game that United had beaten Arsenal 8-2, which was one of those games. I mean, okay, to an extent, it was about Arsenal being hopeless, but it was also just about this ruthless, brilliant team. And then a month after that, a month before this game, you had Tevez refusing to come off the bench, refusing to warm up for City away against Bayern Munich. And that moment, certainly the way I saw it at the time, and I think most people in the British media at the time saw it as, yeah, that's City. They've bought these players, but one of the reasons those players go to City is that they can't quite be trusted elsewhere. That there's a glitch in them that means they're unreliable. So Balotelli, for in a different way to Tevez, would fall into that. But the fact that this game almost feels like the third in a trilogy of United winning 8-2. I mean, the real shame of Tevez refusing to warm up, which it seemed at the time to have sent City spinning off its axis, and then City suddenly do this. And the fact that those three games all came within a 2-month period seems to me, from the perspective of late 2020, it's utterly remarkable.
I also think the 8-2 started an era in a different respect, in that beginning with that, over the last decade, we've actually had quite a lot of really spectacular scorelines in meetings between top teams. I mean, I think it was only a week after this one that there was the Arsenal 5, Chelsea 3 game where Van Persie got a hat-trick. And over that subsequent decade, we've become more used to sort of 5-0s and 6-1s and things like that. The previous decade, you could argue, was dominated by the kind of Mourinho Benitez style games that would be 0-0 or 1-0. And that was part of the shock of the 6-1, was it came completely out of the blue in every respect, except the 8-2 2 months earlier.
It's interesting to see that with Manchester City, with all these players and new faces that were sort of coming and going around this time, it wasn't that long before, what was it, December 2009, Roberto Mancini arrived at Manchester City, taking over from Mark Hughes. I mean, you know, I understand this game is nearly 2 years later, but that's quite a bit of a change. I mean, Mancini gets that FA Cup win, and then he has his sights firmly on the league. I mean, Richard, what was it like when Mancini came in? Obviously, a success at Inter. Did you feel that this was the guy who was going to really change Manchester City's fortunes around?
In all honesty, I didn't know, because I think, as Jonathan says, you do think it's one of these, can it just go completely wrong? Will they just spend too much money and not spend it particularly well? A few months after he came in, they had the game against Tottenham at the Etihad, where basically the winner gets to go in the Champions League and the loser gets to go in the Europa League. It's Tottenham who win it. And we didn't know that much about the kind of the Sheikh Mansour Manchester City at that point. And you're already thinking, well, maybe will they sack Mancini straight away? They obviously didn't. I think what happened then, the next 2 seasons are 2 very, very different seasons in terms of progressing a team and building a team. And that first summer of 2010 was the summer in which Yaya Toure came in, amongst others. But Mancini's team for that next season, where they went on to win the FA Cup, was not actually great to watch. He concentrated on making them hard to beat. It was Gareth Barry and Nigel de Jong in the centre of midfield with Yaya just in front of them. Mancini used the word mentality virtually every press conference, partly because of its similarity to the mentality in Italian, no doubt. But I mean, he just wanted to implement this winning mentality, and it came from the back. And they were, as I say, not aesthetically a great team, not the most attacking team. The following summer, when Sergio Aguero comes in, Yaya Toure moves back into the centre of midfield. Nigel de Jong is dropped. They become a 4-4-2 attacking team. Briefly, we thought that the quartet of Aguero, Dzeko, Balotelli, Tevez is arguably the best quartet of strikers in English football since Ferguson's famous four in the treble winners of 1999. And that City team is a very, very different one from the one the year before. And the team the year before, if they were going to beat United, it was only 1-0. The 2011-12 team actually have a lot more goals in them.
Yeah, I think the other point there, sorry, I think the other point there about the expectations is this is City in the way City used to be. Yeah, they haven't won the league at this point. And we know what City are. We know what they do. And this is also their second bite at having an incredibly wealthy owner. Okay, much, much wealthier than their previous incredibly wealthy owner. But the previous attempt at this had ended with Sven-Göran Eriksson conceding 8 goals, whatever it was. At
8 goals.
8 at Middlesbrough. So but there were a lot of reasons not to have faith.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jonathan, how concerned do you think Sir Alex Ferguson was this new City side, as Richard's just mapped out for us there? I mean, it was quite different to the team that had been in the previous season.
Well, he must have been concerned because when there's any new force, you don't quite know what they're going to do. When they have that much money, of course they're a threat to you. And I guess he'd sort of seen the first phase of this kind of owner with Chelsea. And my suspicion at the time was he slightly underestimated how good Chelsea would be. And again, part of that is that they had that sort of long run in when they seemed to be spending loads of money and going nowhere. And then Abramovich arrives. And even then, the first season, 2003-04, is nothing particularly special. They end up... Ranieri was famously the dead man walking for the majority of that season. And then Mourinho arrives, and suddenly you've got the two. You've got a really, really good manager, and you've got the money to buy really, really good players. And I think Ferguson did, for a little while, struggle to adapt to that. But being Ferguson, he's eventually able to and puts together the 2007-08 team, which in some ways was probably his best team. So yeah, he must have been concerned, and he's too astute a man not to have been led astray by the thought, well, City always fail, so this is guaranteed to fail, while at the same time, in every public appearance, making the point this is City and therefore they will fail, just to undermine them a bit.
Indeed.
And I mean, the other thing is that City and United had become rivals in the transfer market. City had signed Carlos Tevez. They tried to sign Rooney the previous autumn. And then the summer of 2011, they signed Samir Nasri, who was wanted by both Manchester clubs. And actually, you got a reaction the following summer when United signed Robin van Persie, who City also wanted, or rather Mancini also wanted. I'm not sure that City themselves were willing to pay for a fifth striker to join Aguero, Tevez, Dzeko and Balotelli. But that sort of prompted the Van Persie signing to some degree.
All right, gentlemen, let's have a quick break and then we will talk about the match itself. See you in a moment, everybody.
Sorry,
that's all right, no worries.
Turn the light on. Yeah.
Well, welcome back to the greatest games on the Blizzard, everybody. Right then, gentlemen. So going into the game, it was, I think Manchester City were 2 points above Manchester United. And again, Manchester United fans and a lot of neutrals were probably thinking, oh, okay, Manchester United, win this, you're back on top. As the teams come out, I remember the commentator saying, when has there been a more significant meeting in the 120-year history of the Manchester derby? Now, of course, Sky Sports or whoever it was, like to sort of hype these things up and so on. And it is, a bold statement, but Richard, it was a very significant meeting with these two sides in the context of what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd always, as we were saying earlier, every time you get the sense City are getting closer, but United will find a way of putting them back in their place. I mean, I was at the derby a couple of years earlier, Tevez' first derby for City, which was the 4-3 that Michael Owen sealed after 96 minutes, and which Ferguson felt was the greatest derby. And so you just always thought that United would kind of find a way. And United at home in those days, they lost so few games. I mean, I've been going through the games for over the previous 6 seasons when I've been covering matches at Old Trafford fairly regularly, and I think I'd only covered 3 United home defeats in 6 years, and there were 1 or 2 other ones I missed. I wasn't at the 4-1 defeat to Liverpool, but you just didn't expect United to lose at Old Trafford, and you did think that one way or another City would find a way of losing things. And then obviously the other thing, of course, you have in the build-up is Balotelli and his impromptu fireworks display in his bathroom.
I forgot that was the day before.
Yeah, I mean, it culminated Mancini in the press conference after the game, and I remember this quote to this day. He said, "I don't know what happened, but Mario now lives in a hotel." And then, bizarrely, I don't know how City and Greater Manchester Fire Brigade or whoever did this, but somehow he became an ambassador for Greater Manchester Fire Service. And they picked a picture of Balotelli. He looked serious in the picture, but even that, it just made it even funnier. Just this picture of Mario Balotelli as a fire officer.
I mean, Jonathan, at the time, there were so many stories of Balotelli. Obviously, a lot of them apocryphal, but, taking a kid back to school and saying, well, what's the matter? Trying to sort him out and talk to his teachers, or paying for everybody's petrol at the petrol station. And like I say, some of these are true, some of these are not true. But he was an incredible character. We'd seen him produce some brilliant moments, probably most notably in an Inter shirt before Man City, if my memory serves me correctly. But we'd seen some moments of madness. There was that story that Mourinho spoke of when he was Inter manager. They were away to CSKA Moscow. I think Balotelli was on a booking. He's getting a bit spicy. Half time, he says 13 of his 15 minutes he's got with the team is trying to tell Balotelli to calm it. 46th minute, bang, red card, this sort of stuff. I mean, he was an incredible character, and there was so much media attention on him going into this game.
Yeah, and of course that is why he celebrates his goal in the way he does. And I think at this stage, this was sort of the height of the sort of positive publicity he had in England. Mm-hmm. That even the fireworks display, it seems sort of it was born of a sort of naive exuberance and a slight sort of dislocation from how the world works. Things like when he'd turn up at an office block and ask to use their toilet or something. It's a kind of, you can understand how it could happen, even though nobody else ever did it. And there was something quite charming about that. And you'd even understand how if you from a very early age have been plucked out of normal life and put in a football academy, well, of course you don't quite understand how things work. How would you? Why would you? If you're not sort of going to school every day, if you're not going to the office every day. And because he clearly had that very large personality, that tended to provoke all these scrapes. I think then, as the season goes on, some of those things turn a little bit sourer. And then from a football point of view, that culminates with his red card away to Arsenal, which at the time looked as if it had cost City the title, should have cost City the title. Mm-hmm. But at this point, it's still naive, charming Balotelli, who on the pitch was clearly a magnificent footballer. And his finish for that first goal, again, it felt a very Balotelli finish. It was something of great ingenuity, great improvisation, but also immense self-confidence.
Yeah, he had that confidence, didn't he, Richard, did Balotelli, especially when taking penalties as well. I remember he had an interview once, and I can't remember who it was. It might have been Noel Gallagher, actually, off the top of my head, and he said, you were so confident in taking a particular penalty. It might have been last-minute one against Tottenham Hotspur, the 3-2 win at the Etihad. And he said, you were under so much pressure, and he just said, yeah, but I never miss. And he had
Yeah.
so much confidence in Balotelli at this time in his career.
Yeah, it was as though the madness of the rest of his life somehow disappeared when he was at the penalty spot, and he was the calmest man in the ground. And it was very, very strange in that respect. He was a brilliant penalty taker, and I think looking at him now, when I think at the moment he's without a club, and there were these rumours recently that Barnsley wanted him. Going back then, you can see why Mancini, who had obviously been an incredibly talented player himself, was seduced by Balotelli's talent, because he genuinely could have gone on and become one of the top 5 players in the world. And to me, the two greatest performances of Balotelli's career were this one and the Euro 2012 semi-final, I think it was.
Against Germany.
Yeah, exactly. You know, against high-class teams, big pressure games. He was the best player in the pitch in both games. He was the biggest individual reason why City won one and why Italy won the other. And Johnny Evans just couldn't handle him that day.
Yeah. I think actually my favourite Balotelli moment, I'm not sure if it was this winter when City did sort of like an online advent calendar. And one of the days was Balotelli and Carlos Tevez wrapping presents. And Balotelli had not having a clue what to do, and Tevez trying to show him, which Tevez as a teacher is quite a comic notion anyway. And then Balotelli is claiming he can't do it because he's left-handed, which Tevez then just does it left-handed. And Balotelli then just walks off, can't do it. And there's this great moment when, it's a very Argentinian moment, when Tevez looks at him and goes, "Que boludo. What an idiot, what a thicko."
He's just a man just sort of completely different to everyone else, somehow parachuted into their world. And at City's old training ground at Carrington, we could see the players' cars and where they parked. And obviously all the rest of them have expensive cars, and they have sports cars and they have Range Rovers and all the rest of it. Nearly all of their cars were black or white. Balotelli had a camouflage Bentley, which stood out.
It didn't just disappear as he sort of, you know. I mean, yeah, there was that moment where he was trying to get out of the bib, when he was trying to take that bib. I mean, there's so many moments one can forget. Just he was just, I don't know, so enjoyable at times, as you say. But I mean, yeah, I suppose we should get to the game. You know, after 22 minutes, as you say, we sort of talked about the goal as well. I mean, I can't quite recall. Was it slightly against the run of play, the goal, Richard?
I think slightly it was, yeah. But go on, Richard.
No, I mean, I don't recall that so much. I mean, one thing that stood out to me when watching the goal back was that it came from a James Milner cut back from the left. Mancini, in a lot of those games, would play James Milner ahead of Samir Nasri. And I know I talked to Micah Richards about this a few months ago, and he loved playing behind Milner because obviously Milner can run all day. He's your perfect big game player. But it was also the case that what City did for a couple of these goals was a very bespoke tactic that David Silva seems to have introduced, and which he was always involved in, which is that both of their wide men would turn up on the same flank, and they'd work an overload in that respect, get 2 or 3 players combining together very quickly and very closely. It was something that Silva and Samir Nasri did absolutely brilliantly in the Pellegrini title season in 2013-14. And in the days before Silva moved in field to become a kind of free 8, number 10, that was how City created a lot of goals, by having 2 or 3 players turn up right next to each other and outnumber the opponents. And it's a Milner cross from the left for Balotelli to tuck it in.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how the goal comes. It's Silva's pass to Milner. Milner cuts it back. Balotelli at the edge of a box, just sort of opens his body up, and you're using defenders to block off De Gea's eye line, just sort of rolls it from the edge of the box into the bottom corner. And it's the most sort of casual yet precise finish. And then, of course, he lifts up his shirt and that has the "Why Always Me" t-shirt, for which he's booked, clearly.
So again, half-time 1-0. It seems, well, this is a bit strange, but I suppose the big moment, certainly if you're a Manchester United fan, if the game is 2 minutes after half-time, where Johnny Evans is sent off because he's struggling to deal with Balotelli. And Ferguson said in the post-match after, he said he always wants his defender to let the man run through a goal because you've still got 11 men on the pitch, but it wasn't to be. And Johnny Evans was sent off, Richard.
He was, yeah, and I think there's been a bit of revisionism in the last few years since Johnny Evans left Manchester United, because he's been a very, very good player for both Leicester and Northern Ireland in that time. But at that stage, I felt that whenever anything went horribly wrong in the United defence, it often involved Johnny Evans one way or another. And I think some of the subsequent revisionism has come because he was the odd man out when he managed to lose a battle between him, Phil Jones, and Chris Smalling as to which one would get bombed out. And, you know, right now, obviously, anyone would take Johnny Evans over Phil Jones. But he just couldn't cope with Balotelli then, and it was a red card. But it was also the start of the decline of the United defence, because Ferdinand and Vidic were both getting older. They were both getting more injury prone. Evans was the one who was supposed to be coming in as the long-term successor, but he had some spells where he looked good enough, but he had others where, as in this game, there was just that lack of conviction, the occasional tendency to get things completely wrong, and that you know, clearly it wouldn't have been a 6-1 had he stayed on.
But I think you're right about Evans, that because he had that loan spell at Sunderland in the promotion season under Roy Keane, when 95% of the time he was absolutely brilliant. But he was, you get those goalkeepers who are brilliant, but you know that 1 or 2 games a season they'll make a terrible mistake. He was sort of a centre-back equivalent of that. So I can't actually remember who Sunderland lost to in the cup that year, but it was Johnny Evans' fault. I remember that quite clearly. This was an example of that. He could have, Aguero plays Balotelli through. He could have let him go. Maybe Balotelli scores, maybe he doesn't. But Evans takes him down, and it's the most obvious red card you'll ever see.
And then, but still, though, Manchester United don't look too perturbed, if I remember correctly, down to 10 men. But when that second goal goes crashing in on 60 minutes.
Well, United should have conceded the penalty. Anderson fouls Balotelli and gets away with it. But the commentators describe it as a coming together. I mean, in the VAR age, it's a penalty, and I think in that age, it probably should have been a penalty. Yeah.
Well, when the second goal goes in, that's when the alarm bells really start to ring, if they hadn't already, for Manchester United. And again, it's lovely work from David Silva and James Milner down the right, Richard.
It is, yeah. That combination again, but this time with them on the other flank. And I went back and to read what I wrote about the game, not out of sort of narcissism, but just to see how wrong it was. And I described Milner at the time as being often unproductive in a City shirt. And I think part of that was because he was so good and at the hard working side and the tactical side of things, but he wasn't really getting the numbers of goals and assists that you would expect for a wide man at a top club at that point. But it was a terrific low cross from him. And I mean, it was quite similar, I think, to the third goal in some respects, which is Micah Richards' cross for Sergio Aguero. Yeah. But again, that was City were opening United up there, and Micah Richards at that point, he had a fantastic season, and yet he lost his place about 6 weeks from the end of the season to Pablo Zabaleta, who was absolutely outstanding in the second derby of the season, and arguably that was almost the beginning of the end for Micah, because he never got his place back from Zabaleta.
I mean, Jonathan, was it for some people it would be the second goal? Others, it would be the third goal. Dare I say, others, it might be the sixth goal. Was it, for me, I can't remember watching it, but it was definitely the second or the third goal where I thought, oh, blimey, this is actually happening. We are seeing Manchester City, they are going to win at Old Trafford.
Oh, I think the second goal, against 10 men. I guess maybe not. Maybe.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, it's
maybe 10 years of watching City win relentlessly has sort of changed my perspective. But I mean, the third goal is an absolutely brilliant goal. The Yaya Toure, I don't know, it's a 40-yard pass into Balotelli's feet, and Balotelli is strong enough to I can't remember which defender's on him, presumably Ferdinand, but it's strong enough to hold him off, and then just lays it out to his left, because the City right, because he's got his back to goal, and then comes to Milner. He's got Richards going on the outside, plays it to Richards, and then across for Aguero. But it's just you can see that's a move that's been worked on. You can see Balotelli knows where to play. You can see that Milner knows that Richards is coming outside him, and it's just a goal that's so clean and quick in execution that there's no way of defending it. Certainly not with 10 men. There's no way of defending against it.
And Manchester United, they would sort of pick themselves up and got a lovely goal through Fletcher, of course, who in some might argue it was the goal of the game. It was a beauty. But Richard, did you think when that went in, did you think, oh, hang on? Or did you think, no, that's a consolation?
No, I think at the time you're thinking, hang on, surely they can't, because logically they can't. But
well, that shows you that what we've been conditioned to think with Manchester United. They're down to 10 men.
And the amazing thing is, Javier Hernandez runs to get the ball out the net. He thinks it's on.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've had so many comebacks, and there were so many games where they'd be sort of 2-0 down and they get one, and you think, well, they've won this game now. And okay, this one's a different one because it's from 3-0 down, it's with 10 men, it's against a top team. But you still just thought it could be on. And it's so different from the modern Manchester United in that respect. You know, there have been any number of games in the post-Ferguson era where you think, yep, they're beaten here, but not that one and not then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because then the goals go flying in at the other end. And I mean, Ferguson said in the post-match interview that the team was pushing up far too high, you know, when considering they had 10 men, the fullbacks were playing like wingers. He used words to describe their play like suicidal and crazy. And I suppose, I mean, Jonathan, does that go in with the mentality he'd installed in those players that actually even when they got it back to 3-1, I mean, it was very, very, very unlikely, down to 10 men, of course, and so on. But perhaps they still believed they could get something out of the game.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they did. And Chicharito going to get the ball out of the net shows that. And I think City must have had a doubt because the whole previous sort of 30 years of history have told you this is possible. Oh, sorry, 20 years then of history have told you this is possible. I think for Ferguson to be that critical of his players, I mean, I can understand why, because obviously losing 6-1 is humiliating. But if I had got another goal back after 85 minutes, say, and suddenly I've got 5 minutes plus injury time, I would put a huge amount of money on them getting that equaliser. So, yeah, you don't get those comebacks if you accept defeat. And okay, maybe you can say the situation was so much against them that they should have been a bit more realistic. But it's still, I still think the percentage for them to do when Fletcher scores that goal is to chase a second goal. You can't imagine the circumstances to reach to reach what happened on the final day where that goal difference becomes crucial. That can't be your thought when you're 3-1 down. When you've just scored that goal to cut the deficit, when you're United, when you're at home, when you've got this history of comebacks, when City have got this history of letting things slip, in some ways it's a great opportunity to humiliate them again, and to basically mean that for the next 5 or 10, 15 years, however long, even when they're 3-0 up with 10 minutes to go with a man advantage, they're going to have that little doubt of, oh no, it could happen again.
I think it's safe to say, though, Richard, when the fourth goes in, I mean, that was it, surely. I mean, it came 9 minutes after Fletcher made it 3-1. But I mean, it's from a corner. It's not like it's a breakaway and Manchester United are all up the other end. I mean, how the goal goes in, it does feel like it is the fourth goal, kind of in the 90th minute, which of course it was.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sort of Edin Dzeko just to tap him when Lescott knocks it back across the goal. But like you say, United weren't all committed upfield because it was a corner. But the influence of Edin Dzeko as a substitute would obviously be proved much later that season on the final day when he scores against QPR. And Dzeko was a very, very strange player at City, partly still an enigma to this day, someone who would often be brilliant as a substitute, then he'd get his chance as a starter, and then he'd be terrible, and he'd end up back on the bench again where he'd score again. And his City career kind of went in those sort of patterns. And I felt that maybe it was a psychological thing with Dzeko. I think one of the reasons why he was more consistent at Wolfsburg and Roma was that he was someone who actually quite liked being the main man and having everything built around him. Whereas at City, they had 4 strikers, and initially Tevez was obviously the major character. Later, Aguero emerges as the great goal scorer, and Balotelli's always the one who needs special attention because he's Balotelli. So Dzeko was always kind of the other one. but he was a brilliant substitute, and he showed that in this game with 2 goals in very quick succession. And either side of the David Silva one.
Yeah, I mean it's funny when you describe Dzeko like that. There's one or two. I mean, really, I'm honing in on the whole substitute thing. There's a slight sort of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer sort of feel to, as I say, to those goals from coming on as a substitute. Perhaps we'll look forward to him having a slightly underwhelming time as Manchester City manager in the future, if that is anything to go by. But 4-1 soon became 5-1, Jonathan, and it's David Silva who seemed to be involved in everything that they did well that day, and he was down the right side, and I think it was Dzeko that slotted him in.
Dzeko's pass, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a nutmeg pass and a nutmeg finish, and it just sort of, I mean, the fact it's a pair of nutmegs that kind of brings that goal. It just seems to be piling ignominy upon ignominy. But I mean, Dzeko, I think, is a very strange footballer. He's somebody who's really hard to categorise, because he's sort of, when he came through in Bosnia had never seen anything like him, because Bosnian footballers stereotypically are sort of little technical dribblers. But he's this sort of, a target man build, but he's only sort of half a target man. He's not Niall Quinn. There I talk about Niall Quinn yet again. He's kind of half a Niall Quinn, but he's also kind of.
No one's ever compared him to Niall Quinn before, by the way.
I think if you're doing kind of a list of greatest City target men, you say he's not as good as Quinn. But yeah, he sort of, because of his build and because he's got a sort of slightly clumsy manner about him, you think I think people have thought he's a target man, but he's not. He's much more mobile than that. He's good at dropping off. This pass to Silva shows his technical quality. I mean, in Bosnia when he came through, he was nicknamed the not a lamppost. What's the word I'm looking for? The metal pole that you put a sign on. Do we have a word for that in English?
Just a pole.
Maybe. Yeah, pole. But that's confusing because he's not Polish. Let's call him a lamppost, because the equivalent, a big steel thing in the ground. Was he? I think he's at Zeljeznica. Whichever Bosnian club he was at, just didn't see anything in him. And when Wolfsburg said, "Yeah, we'll give you 20,000 euros or 25,000 euros for him," the directors went out and bought the best champagne they could find. They couldn't believe they got this incredible deal to get rid of this useless, lumbering oaf. And then 2 years later, he's single-handedly winning the league with Wolfsburg, and they're sort of thinking, "Oh, maybe we could have got a bit more than 20,000 euros." So I think people throughout his career have struggled to kind of to quite place him. And I think Richard's right that I don't think it's an ego thing that he needs things to be built around him. But I think it's something about how he is on the pitch, that if you think of how he played both for Wolfsburg and for Bosnia, he's often a very lonely forward. He'd often have 20 or 30 yards. He'd be 9 other outfielders quite a long way behind him, and his job would be to hold it up, to get a free kick, to get a throw in. And I think he's good at that because he's got the sort of smartness to do that. He's got enough technical ability and enough physical ability to do that. But when he's in a team that's dominant, like City, when he's got to play with other creative attacking players, that just complicates things. And I don't think he was ever quite as good at that.
Well, he got the 6th goal, and again, David Silva was involved. Lovely ball through to Edin Dzeko, sort of runs through and finishes 6-1. And I mean, that late flurry of goals, Richard, really just was so enjoyed and relished by Manchester City, and made it really, really embarrassing for Manchester United. I mean, it's those goals that make it such a memorable occasion. Had it ended 3-1, dare I even say 4-1, of course it would have been a massive result and a one that they would have cherished for many years. But those 2 late goals and that 6th goal as it goes in, they couldn't believe their luck.
Exactly, and it's still just the most resonant scoreline probably in the Premier League in since then. I would say, certainly in the context of who it was against. I mean, it was Ferguson's 2062nd game in management, and to have the first 6-1 against him then says something. I mean, for David Silva, that assist for the Dzeko goal, the hooked eye of the needle pass, that remains his most famous and most celebrated City assist, even though in one respect it didn't change anything. It was a game that had already been won. And in one respect, it was a very untypical assist for David Silva, because he often makes things look deceptively easy. And I think a lot of people, when they would seen that one, would think, actually, that's a technical skill that very, very few players could do. But the scale of the defeat, I think Ferguson recognised it immediately. And sometimes Ferguson was very, very good at reading the mood. And he knows when you lose 6-1, you can't make excuses. You can't complain about the referee. You can't mention injuries or whatever else. You just have to accept it and take it. And as I said earlier, he did mention straight in the press conference about the goal difference, which proved a very prescient comment. And to go back a couple of months earlier, he read the mood after the 8-2 over Arsenal and didn't gloat over Arsene Wenger, which he might well have done had it been a 2-0 or a 3-1 or something like that. But 8-2, he just recognised the magnitude of it and was actually quite restrained in what he said about Arsenal and quite generous.
Yeah, I know. I vividly remember that. Actually, he almost seemed slightly embarrassed or almost apologetic, didn't he? You know, so I think he even said something like, "Yeah, there's no need to score 8 goals" or something like that. But he certainly used the word embarrassing a couple of times at least, Jonathan, in the post-match interview after this game, because there was no other word really that was more fitting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things Ferguson always stressed, as a habitual thing he would say after defeats is, the important thing is not the defeat, it's the response to the defeat. And it took a little while for them to respond. And Rio Ferdinand subsequently said in an interview that in some ways it was the best thing that could have happened for United, in that they realised they were playing in a very open way, and it made the whole team, not just the defence, tighten up. And I guess it gets them back in the title race in this season, but it then allows them to win the title the following season. So, I mean, the best thing that could have happened for them, I suspect he probably would rather not have 6-1, but it was a classic example of Ferguson's strength, that he took an embarrassment, he took a huge defeat, and he used it as a lesson and built from it. And they're not sort of obliterated and disappear. They come back and win the title again in his final season.
Yeah,
but obviously he would have left a year earlier had they won the league in 2012. So City did manage to postpone his retirement for a year.
Yeah, I mean, Manchester City, obviously they had the lead, so they would argue that they did go on to win the league. Had they not have done, they would have rued that lead that they'd thrown away. But Manchester United will look back at this season and say, "My goodness, how did we not win the league?" Because despite that 6-1 defeat, as you say, they overturned it, and we go into the third last game of the season, which, if the 6-1 was, the most sort of significant meeting in the 120-year history, it quickly became the sort of second most significant when 3 days before, three games, the third last game of the season saw the two of the sides meet at the Etihad with just a Vincent Kompany goal separating the sides. And even then, Manchester City nearly messed it all up, of course, at home against QPR. But this season, Richard, was so significant because it was finally winning the league. Because as we said at the start, the FA Cup's all very well, but the league is really where you're the sort of the king of the country, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there have been the banner up and the Stretford end at Old Trafford, sort of counting the number of years that City had gone without a trophy of any kind. But Mancini managed to take that down by winning the FA Cup. Not literally. I mean, well, not as far as I'm aware, anyway. He might have done, but to actually win the league and to displace United in the process, I think was a huge achievement. And to do it within the same city was an even bigger achievement. And I think Mancini, in some ways, is almost the kind of the forgotten great Premier League manager, partly because of what's happened since then at City, partly because his final year was underwhelming, to say the least, partly because he obviously did spend a hell of a lot of money in both transfer fees and wages. And one of the things that I thought of looking back at that game is, at the time, because it's Ferguson's United, you automatically think they're favourites. Well, I looked at the two team sheets, and for the midfield and forward line, this is United. It's Nani, Darren Fletcher, Anderson, Ashley Young, and then Wayne Rooney and Danny Welbeck up front. City, James Milner, Yaya Toure, Gareth Barry, David Silva, Sergio Aguero, and Mario Balotelli. Well, I think looking back at it now, you can say, well, clearly City did have the more talented team. And to some extent, they ought to win. Maybe not 6-1, of course. Mm-hmm. But it's still an achievement to knock Ferguson's United off their perch. And that's what Mancini did. And that was his great feat for City.
I mean, on that point of United's side looking weirdly underwhelming, the middle of the midfield in the 8-2 was Anderson and Tom Cleverley.
Yes. Oh, yeah. In that brief phase where one or two people were deluded enough to believe that Tom Cleverley was England's next great midfielder. And obviously the defence was getting older, as we said, and Ferguson went for years without signing a central midfielder over the age of about 18. Which just didn't make any sense. During the time of the 6-1, it was Paul Scholes was briefly in retirement at that point, only to come out of it again, make his second United debut actually as a sub in the FA Cup tie against City. But that was bringing Scholes back at 37 or 38. And whereas one of the reasons City won that 1-0 in the return fixture was the power they had in midfield and the running power of Yaya Toure, who basically finished Ji-Sung Park's career that game because Park just couldn't keep up with him at all. And Park was Ferguson's specialist man marker for the big occasion, the man you put on someone like Andrea Pirlo. But that day, he just couldn't cope with Yaya Toure. And I think one of the differences between Mancini's City and Guardiola's City was that Mancini built a team who were a lot bigger. It was an athletic team in terms of their running power, but also in terms of their size. If you look at some of his sides, apart from Aguero and David Silva, you'd have 9 6-footers out there. Mm-hmm. So he had different ways of winning games with those teams. And Yaya Toure was near his physical peak at that time. Vincent Kompany was near his physical peak. You had Balotelli, whose physical peak was obviously, he was very, very quick. James Milner still can run all day, even now. Micah Richards could bomb forward as well. And United actually, it was a mixed side in terms of age, but some of the key players were aging players then. The Ferdinand Vidic and Evra at the back, Giggs in midfield, Scholes when he came back out of retirement as well. And I think all of those factors combined in making City a formidable team who could just about take advantage of United's slight drop off.
Well, it's been this one with you, Richard. I mean, just to finish with a couple of stats, Manchester United's worst home defeat since 1955, this match, and the first time since 1930 they'd conceded 6 goals at Old Trafford, just to re-emphasise the sort of the magnitude of this result. But I'll leave the final words to that fan commentator who had possibly the best day of his life and summed it all up nicely when the 6-1 went in and just shouted down the camera, 6-1 at the Swamp. So there we are. Richard, thank you very much for coming in to the pod. It's been a pleasure having you.
Yes, thank you.
For more stories like that, ladies and gentlemen, check out theblizzard.co.uk. But until next week, have a good one, and we'll be back with another great game from football. Cheers.